Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the official global launch of the Network Readiness Index 2024 here at Saïd Business School, University of Oxford. Over 450 people registered to watch the live stream of this event from all over the world. And we're also very grateful to see so many of you in the room with us today, despite the near freezing temperature outside. So we can only hope that the discussion today will provide enough heat to make up for that. So for those less familiar, as you just saw on the screen, the NRI is a global benchmarking tool that assesses 133 economies across 54 different indicators to assess their levels of digital readiness and also the impact that digital technologies are having on their economies and society. And the annual report is published by the Portulans Institute and Saïd Business School at the University of Oxford in partnership with our esteemed knowledge partner, Amazon Web Services, and also the CNI from Brazil, the National Confederation of Industry. So today's event will provide some insightful remarks from leaders, ICT leaders from all over the world, and also the exclusive presentation of the 2024 report and findings, and also an insightful discussion into the role of public-private partnerships in building digital readiness across the world. So I'm aware everyone wants to see the rankings and data, so I won't take up too much of your time, and I'll just give the floor to Soumitra Dutta, Dean at Saïd Business School of the University of Oxford and also co-founder of the Network Readiness Index. Over to you, Soumitra.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Miriam. I'm wearing multiple hats out here. Let me just sort of wear my first hat as the Dean of the Saïd Business School. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome you out here. The Saïd Business School is the business school of the University of Oxford. And we're very, very proud to be that school inside this great university. So the Saïd Business School, for those of you who know probably a little bit about it, or not as much, it's a relatively young school, less than 30 years old, 29 years old, in a historic university. So we often call ourselves a startup in a historic university. And the Saïd Business School also today has done exceedingly well globally. Today we are ranked in the top 10 globally in almost all of our programs. And I think is a very big credit to the work done by our faculty and staff out here. I have been the dean of the school for the last 2.5 years. Prior to that, I was in the US, in New York at Cornell, where I'm also the dean of the business school out there. Now, my second hat that I wear out here really is as the co-founder of the Network Readiness Index. And I just thought that I'll give you a few words of introduction about how this whole journey started back in 2002. And the story really goes back to the World Economic Forum, where there was a lot of discussion back around 2000. The internet had just started becoming commercialized, going live in many countries. And there were very isolated examples of stories of how the internet was being used by farmers in India to check commodity prices before selling, fishermen in Africa to check, avoid overfishing and coordinate the fishing strategies. But there wasn't really much data about how ICT was helping the development of nations. Yes, there was some data about bandwidths and about computer penetration in schools and so on, but really there wasn't an overall framework about how technology was impacting the development of societies and nations as a whole. So the World Economic Forum got together a group of experts in 2000-2001 time period, and they gave us a mandate to say, okay, why don't you think about how can you create some kind of a framework that can be used to collect data and get evidence behind this belief that we have that technology actually helps the development and competitiveness of nations. So that process was very, very interesting. I was fortunate to be part of the team that time. And looking back, we were actually quite far-sighted in some of our observations and results. Back in 2002, we actually introduced the notion of regulations. We introduced the notion of the social context. We introduced the notion of how, in fact, business and political stability actually impacts how technology is used. Today it might seem obvious, we take it for granted, but I can assure you, if you think back to 20 years ago, it wasn't obvious at all. People often thought of technology in very technical terms, bits and bytes and computer penetration terms. So in some sense, the World Economic Forum at that point set the stage, what I think today is very true, of how technology impacts societies, impacts nations, and all the different facets that are actually becoming important. For 17 years, the report was published from the World Economic Forum inside the report called the Global Information Technology Report. I was the editor, co-editor of that for 17 years. And then in 2016-17, the forum stopped publishing the report for a number of internal decisions, and they handed the report back to me. And they said that you're one of the original co-founders and co-editors of the report, so here is something you can take your baby back and you can try and do something with it if you would like to take it forward. And at that moment, and that's where my third hat comes in, with my colleague, Dr. Bruno Lanva, who was also a co-author with me, or co-editor with me of the report at the forum, we decided to set up an independent think tank in Washington, D.C. to focus on this index, and that was Portulans Institute. So I'm also the founder of Portulans Institute, and over the last few years, since 2019, Portulans really has become one of the major sources of evidence-based decision-making in technology innovation and human capital formation. So that's how these sort of three things come together. And of course, the Network Readiness Index, you'll see the model that Rafael will present, who's the CEO of the Institute. He'll present it later in his comments. What you will see is that the model also has changed. So technology and how technology impacts our lives has changed dramatically in the last few years. And I think what we are doing in the model right now really is reflecting some of those concerns, some of those important issues. Issues around inclusivity, issues around trust, issues around governance, issues around environmental impact, societal impact. And I think these kinds of topics, which today are very high on the agenda, are now being reflected in the model, which was not there probably 10 years ago. So in many ways, we see this index and the model as a living sort of piece of work. It keeps getting improved every year. And that's one reason why the collaboration of our partners, AWS and others, and your presence out here is very important, because your feedback actually helps us to improve the index. I can tell you the index is a good one, but not complete and not accurate, because technology is a very sort of diffuse, multifaceted phenomenon. And we struggle to find metrics to define all the different elements accurately for so many countries. If we had chosen to limit our coverage to a small number of countries, we could probably find more detailed, in-depth data. But we have deliberately chosen to be much more global and cover at least 130 countries or so. And that choice that we have made to be more broad and more global limits some of the kind of variables we can actually use in the analysis, because the amount of variables available often is limited by the availability of different countries. A lot of challenges in doing this index every year. I can tell you that it's not an easy process. It takes more than 6 months just to even collect the data, clean it up, and often the data that comes from different sources sometimes has errors. And catching those errors and cleaning them is actually something that the team, in fact, led by Rafael, spends a lot of time and effort in. Each year, we also choose a thematic topic for the report. This year's thematic topic is digital public-private partnerships. As we'll discuss today, I think that's a very, very important way in which we can advance the digital agenda across the world. It's important to keep in mind that despite all the progress that we have seen, around 2.5 billion people today do not have access to the broadband. Okay, I was attending the Broadband Commissioners meeting in New York about a couple of months ago, and the number one agenda item for the Broadband Commission, the ITU today, is to in fact provide inclusive broadband access. And what is interesting out here is that from a technology point of view, it can be done. Okay, technologically, there's nothing preventing us from doing it. But then often the challenges in actually providing access to everyone are a combination of financing, combination of who takes the risk, and a number of other different factors. And to make these kinds of goals more viable and more, let's say, actionable, you need public-private partnerships. You cannot do it alone. That's the reality. And the question how to structure it and all this is very complicated. It's a decision that requires the participation of many factors out here. So I think the number of different sort of issues that come up out here, and if we are leaving behind 2.5 billion people out of this broadband digital world, imagine what we are doing to their lives and to their children and to their economic viability. So there's a huge, huge challenge and responsibility for us, and we are very privileged because we, in fact, benefit from that kind of broadband access and all the kind of good things that technology brings us. But there's a large chunk of the world today that does not have access. And actually, if you keep in mind the bigger picture that technology is progressing so rapidly and AI is driving the change so dramatically, we can't even provide broadband access. What about providing access to the AI tools and other kind of things that are required today for critical thinking, for reading, for actually becoming more employable in society? So I really think that despite so many years of progress, as a society and collectively, we have a lot more work to be done. At the same time, on the positive side, there's a lot of opportunities in terms of what can be done. If you look at the UN SDG goals, and we'll talk about that in the panel later, for many of the UN SDG goals, we are horribly behind today, as we all know. The solutions potentially are there for many of them, but they require technology in almost all cases. Okay, you want to roll out digital health and digital education, you need technology, you need access. A lot of different things have to come in place out there. But if we get it right, we can actually provide good quality healthcare, good quality education to billions, in fact, the whole world's population. And imagine what it does to the possibilities that the next generation young people can have today in the world, especially in emerging markets. I come from emerging market myself, India, and even though India has progressed a lot, and of course India's, in the news in multiple ways, each time I go back home, I see young kids close to where I live. And I see how limited they are in terms of access to education, to technology, and all that. And I feel sorry that even though they're bright, and I can see it in their eyes, literally, you look at the eyes and you can see the brightness in the eyes. I feel sorry that we are unable to actually give them access to even the basics that are required for their livelihood and their future. And I think this is an important thing for us to keep in mind as we discuss today, because I think technology is critical for our futures, not just in the developed nation, but also, I think, more important in the global south, or even in developed nations in the less, let's say, rich parts of society. There are many stories in the COVID pandemic when, even Manhattan, 25% of the students didn't have access to internet. They could not actually study. That's a huge issue, even in one of the richest cities in the world, Manhattan. So I think there are lots of issues out here. I hope that we'll use this chance to have a discussion really around these issues. And I think collectively, if we can even mobilize some new ideas, create some action out here, that'll be good use of the time out here. So thank you very much once again for coming, and I hand back to Mariam.
Thank you, Soumitra, for the warm welcome to Oxford, and also for telling us about the journey of the NRI. It's always inspiring to hear about your vision, creating this report over 20 years ago, back in the day when digital transformation and technology was still in their early days. So it's very inspiring to hear, and I'd say having tools such as the NRI is more important now than ever to help decision makers all over the world exercise metrics-based decision making on technology and ICT so that they continue to drive positive impact. With that, I'd like to begin a series of opening remarks from ICT leaders from all over the world. First, we'll hear from Neeraj Mittal, who is the Secretary of the Department of Telecommunications from the Government of India. While he couldn't join us in person today, he has sent a video message offering valuable insights into India's impressive digital journey. So let's hear it.
Good afternoon, everyone. I thank Professor Soumitra Dutta and his team at Saïd Business School, University of Oxford, for having invited me today to the launch of Network Readiness Index 2024, which has the theme of building a digital tomorrow. I apologize for not being able to attend this in person due to some prior commitments, but I'm extremely honored to be here today. The Network Readiness Index really measures the country's capacity to exploit information and communication technology effectively. We are able to judge the role ICT plays in economic, social, political development, which is driven by technology. India's ranking has improved over the years, and we hope that this year too, India's ranking will reflect the concerted efforts government has made in improving digital connectivity and access to people. The Network Readiness Index covers four good pillars: technology, people, governance, and impact. And in all these areas, India has made significant leaps in improving its performance over the years. If you look at the achievements of telecom sector, India had the fastest rollout of 5G services. Our median mobile broadband speed has increased from about 14 megabits per second to 92 megabits per second. We have 99% coverage of footprint in 4G and about 4.6 lakh 5G BTSs across the country. We have the second largest subscriber base in the world, and the mobile data consumption also has increased to about 21 GB per month, which is one of the highest in the world. All this comes at dirt cheap prices of data, which help the economy in several ways. This has been possible by concerted efforts of the Honorable Prime Minister through the programs such as Gati Shakti Sanchar Portal, which uses many GIS layers to help do unified planning across various departments, breaking the silos. The right of way applications, which used to take 448 days, has reduced to about 41 days, which is a reduction of almost 90%. Certifications have been enabled through certification labs. A new Telecom Act has come, which has replaced the 150-year-old Act. There have been several reforms in the governance of telecom sector by changing definitions, bringing in spectrum sharing and trading, allowing spectrum a regulatory sandbox, and simplified certification schemes. Security is one of the items which is very high in the agenda of the government. As economies are becoming more and more digital, there are more and more security risks. There are people who are trying to use the telecom infrastructure to defraud people. Therefore, Department of Telecom has launched several initiatives, including a digital intelligence platform which crowdsources and works with several stakeholders to provide intelligent and secure telecom ecosystem. The country has also invested heavily in indigenizing technology and promoting telecom manufacturing, and this has led to excellent results through cumulative investment of roughly about 4,000 crores and an employment generation of about 25,000 people. The startup ecosystem of India is vibrant, and telecom is not new to that. We have shared this glory with about 104 startups, 81 patents, and a lot of original work by small startups in chipsets, 6G, quantum, and optical communication. India aims to lead the world in the development of 6G standards, and to that extent, we have launched the Bharat 6G Alliance, which has rolled out a lot of collaborations across the world. India is also leading in proliferating the use cases of 5G technologies in both industry and in the villages so that the lives of people can be improved. We are collaborating with educational institutions, have a dedicated R&D fund to enable research and development in indigenous technology. We hope that India will lead the world and become a manufacturing destination for telecom products across the world. I hope that the Network Readiness Index will enable us to move through this reform process and help India be a significant market player in the telecom world. I once again convey my sincere regards to the team at Portulans Institute and Saïd Business School, University of Oxford, and all its associated partners. And I wish you a very successful launch of NRI 2024. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
I would like to thank Secretary Mittal and his team for this very insightful video message, and I would also encourage all of you to take a look at the report where you will find interesting case studies and examples from India, especially from the public-private partnership area that could be highly relevant to other countries as well. Now I'm pleased to introduce another video message, this time from Dejan Ristić, Minister of Telecommunications and Information Technologies of Serbia.
Uvaženi profesore Dutta, poštovani profesori, državni zvaničnici, predstavnici institucija, poštovane koleginice i kolege, dame i gospodo, izuzetno mi je čast da vam se danas obratim u ime Republike Srbije na predstavljanju Network Readiness Indexa. Ovaj indeks nam omogućava da razumemo spregu između 4 ključne dimenzije za razvoj sektora informaciono-komunikacionih tehnologija, a to su tehnologija, ljudi, upravljanje i uticaj. Mnogo je truda uloženo u izradu ovog indeksa i voleo bih da iskoristim priliku i zahvalim se svima koji su doprineli njegovoj izradi. Ovogodišnja tema, izgradnja digitalne sutrašnjice, javno-privatna ulaganja i globalna saradnja za digitalnu spremnost, od suštinske je važnosti za razumevanje neophodne sprege i saradnje koja mora postojati između privrede i države kako bi se pružio dodatni podsticaj razvoju informaciono-komunikacionih tehnologija i prevazišli izazovi sa kojima se ova oblast suočava u naše vreme. Jedan od glavnih prioriteta Vlade Republike Srbije upravo je rast i razvoj IKT sektora. Zahvaljujući kreiranju povoljnog zakonodavnog i institucionalnog ambijenta, stvorili smo uslove koji su omogućili privredi da se neometano razvija i postali smo regionalni lider u IKT sektoru. Kada govorimo o konkretnim podacima, istakao bih i to da je u prvih 9 meseci ove godine prihod od izvoza IKT usluga i proizvoda dostigao blizu 3 milijarde evra, što predstavlja rast od čak 19% u odnosu na prethodnu rekordnu godinu, kada je taj prihod iznosio oko 2,5 milijarde evra. Veliko mi je zadovoljstvo i čast da kažem da do kraja godine očekujemo prihod od izvoza IKT usluga od čak 4 milijarde evra. Voleo bih da naglasim i to da je prethodne 2023. godine IKT sektor činio 12,2% sveukupne srpske privrede, odnosno da je sa 6,8% doprinosio našem BDP-u. Ponosni smo na razvijenu mrežu institucija koje posvećeno rade na daljem unapređenju IKT sektora u našoj zemlji. Neke od tih institucija su Državni data centar, Institut za veštačku inteligenciju, 4 naučno-tehnološka parka, Biosens institut, dok je u toku izgradnja Biofor kampusa i inovacionog distrikta, koji će dodatno unaprediti IKT sektor u našoj zemlji. Ogroman uticaj na nastavak ubrzanog razvoja IKT sektora imaće i specijalizovana izložba Expo, koja će biti održana u Beogradu 2027. godine. Kao globalna platforma, Expo 2027. godine nesumnjivo će dodatno afirmisati i učvrstiti poziciju Srbije kao regionalnog lidera u IKT sektoru. Na stotine, čak i hiljade naših inostranih kompanija iz IKT sektora dobit će mogućnost da tokom trajanja specijalizovane izložbe Expo Beograd 2027. predstavi svoja najnovija dostignuća, ali i da otvori mogućnost za produbljivanje, saradnje i uspostavljanje novih partnerstava. Uveren sam da će Expo Beograd 2027. godine dati nesagledivo snažan impuls za razvoj čitave Republike Srbije u najširem smislu, kao i mnogih privrednih grana i sektora usluga, a samim tim i za dalji ubrzani razvoj celokupnog IKT sektora. Istovremeno, izuzetno smo posvećeni i odlučno radimo na ulaganju u ljude i razvoj kadrova u ovom sektoru. Ostvarujemo odličnu saradnju sa obrazovnim institucijama, pre svega sa tehničkim fakultetima u Beogradu, Novom Sadu, Nišu i Kosovskoj Mitrovici. Kroz različite vrste programa i podsticaja trudimo se da obezbedimo najbolje moguće uslove za dalji napredak naših talentovanih đaka i studenata, kao i da im pružimo priliku da svoje znanja pokažu i dokažu i na međunarodnim takmičenjima, nakon čega očekujemo da svoju profesionalnu karijeru ostvare u vodećim srpskim IT kompanijama, obrazovnim, razvojnim i naučnim institucijama. U prethodnom periodu uspešno smo otpočeli proceduru za uvođenje 5G mreže u Republici Srbiji i očekujemo da procedura u potpunosti bude okončana do sredine naredne 2025. godine. Ponosni smo i na činjenicu da je Republika Srbija prepoznata kao lider u oblasti razvoja veštačke inteligencije i njene implementacije u privredi. Veoma smo ponosni na to što će već sledećeg meseca Republika Srbija otpočeti predsjedavanje globalnim partnerstvom za veštačku inteligenciju. Kako bismo osigurali da IKT sektor nastavi da se razvija, neophodno je da svi naši građani imaju pristup brzom optičkom internetu. Upravo zato već godinama uspešno radimo na realizaciji projekata izgradnje širokopojasne komunikacione infrastrukture u ruralnim predelima Republike Srbije. Ovim projektom obuhvaćeno je oko 900 naselja i više od 128.000 domaćinstava i on će biti finalizovan do kraja 2026. godine. Istovremeno, pored neizmerne važnosti da svako dete u Srbiji ima pristup brzom internetu, još važnije nam je da na internetu ostane u potpunosti bezbedno. Upravo zato smo veoma ponosni na rad i aktivnosti našeg nacionalnog kontakt centra za bezbednost dece na internetu. Od 2017. godine, kada je osnovan, održao je na stotine specijalizovanih obrazovnih programa deci i đacima širom Srbije. Republika Srbija nastavlja kroz čitav niz aktivnosti sa predanim radom na kontinuiranom unapređenju elektronske pismenosti svih naših građana. Na portalu e-uprava dostupno je na desetine specijalizovanih elektronskih usluga koje umnogome ubrzavaju poslovanje privrede, ali i smanjuju birokratiju i olakšavaju procedure svim našim građanima. Istakao bih i to da je Republika Srbija svrstana u grupu najuspešnijih zemalja kao role model zemalja, odnosno zemalja za primer, po globalnom indeksu informacione bezbednosti koji utvrđuje Međunarodna telekomunikaciona unija. Upravo ova priznanja potvrđuju da naši napori nisu samo prepoznati, već i visoko cenjeni na svetskom nivou. Čvrsto sam uveren u to da smo naporima i resursima koje smo uložili u razvoj IKT sektora i telekomunikacione infrastrukture postavili čvrste temelje za budućnost Srbije kao digitalno inovativne i globalno konkurentne ekonomije. Naš cilj je ne samo da nastavimo sa tehnološkim napretkom, već i da obezbedimo da koristi od digitalne transformacije budu dostupne svim građanima, podstičući inkluzivan razvoj, ekonomski rast i podizanje kvaliteta života. Uvereni smo u to da ćemo uz podršku naših partnera i posvećenost svih aktera zajedno oblikovati budućnost u kojoj će digitalizacija biti ključni pokretač održivog i sveobuhvatnog razvoja naše zemlje. Još jednom vam zahvaljujem na privilegiji da vam se danas obratim. Želim vam prijatan i uspešan ostatak programa. Hvala vam.
We'd like to thank Minister Ristić and his team for this very informative message and very detailed description of Serbia's digitalization journey. From Serbia, we turn our attention to Brazil, and we'll hear from Ricardo Alban, President of the Brazilian National Confederation of Industry, which is one of our knowledge partners for the 2024 edition of the Network Readiness Index.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to ask permission to speak in Portuguese. Nós, da Confederação Nacional da Indústria, estamos muito felizes em ter contribuído para a apresentação desses dados, resultado do Network Readiness Index de 2024, em parceria com o Portulans Instituto. Para nós é de grata satisfação podermos fazer parte de todo esse processo de estudo e apresentar esse resultado. A área de digitalização é de capital importância para a inserção das nossas indústrias, quer sejam pequenas, médias ou grandes, na nova realidade que a economia mundial e as novas cadeias de valores exigem para o futuro das indústrias. Nesse processo, nós temos buscado, antes de tudo, as parcerias mais diversas possíveis, e dentre elas, obviamente, as parcerias público-privadas são de capital importância para que nós possamos ter a dimensão e a atingir o grau maior possível das indústrias. Nós, nas indústrias, obviamente, no Brasil, pequenas e médias, o acesso à digitalização, a cultura da digitalização é muito pequena. E nós precisamos preparar essas empresas para que elas façam parte de uma cadeia produtiva de valor que tenha a competitividade necessária para a nova realidade. Dentro desses processos que nós fazemos de parcerias público-privadas, existe o Brasil Mais Produtivo, que nós fazemos com o Senai e com o governo brasileiro dentro da política nova de indústria, para que possamos efetivamente chegar principalmente nessas cadeias de valores que se referem a indústrias de menor e médio porte, para que possamos fazer com que elas sejam inseridas nesse processo de digitalização fundamental para a realidade do mundo atual. Dentro desses processos, nós gostaríamos mais uma vez de reconhecer a parceria com o Instituto Portulans, no qual tem sido fundamental para que a gente tenha as entregas necessárias. Também, nós, através do Movimento Empresarial para a Inovação, através dos maiores CEOs que trabalham nas empresas de inovação e tecnologia, temos um fórum onde a digitalização, a transformação digital são fundamentais e foco de estudo de um trabalho técnico para que possamos ter continuidade em todas as estratégias e todas as ações que são praticadas, quer seja públicas, seja privadas ou em conjunto. Dessa forma, em nome da Soumitra Dutta, gostaria de agradecer toda a equipe da Portulans Instituto pela parceria de longa data pela inovação e transformação digital no Brasil, que tem de capital importância para os novos momentos, para a nova economia, para a nova fase que nós queremos enfrentar na indústria, na nova indústria Brasil.
CNI's support for the Network Readiness Index reflects its commitment towards advancing digital transformation, not only in Brazil, but beyond. And we're very grateful to the entire team for their support and help shaping the 2020 edition of the report. From Brazil, now we turn to France, and we'll hear from Tawfik Jelassi, Assistant Director General for Communication and Information at UNESCO. Mr. Jelassi is also one of the advisors of the Network Readiness Index, and he's been helping us improve the NRI model for quite a few years now, and we're very grateful and fortunate to benefit from his expertise.
Professor Soumitra Dutta, distinguished speakers, esteemed participants. Year after year, the Network Readiness Index has become a very important tool for countries to benchmark themselves and assess the progress they made in terms of technology, people, governance, and impact, also known as the 4 key pillars of NRI. I would like to congratulate the NRI team for their great work. The 2024 launch marks another bold step towards benchmarking the future of the network economy, and it is my pleasure to speak at this year's NRI launch. Before I proceed further, let me start by expressing my deepest appreciation to Professor Soumitra Dutta, to Mr. Bruno Lanvin, for the kind invitation to be part of this important event. The 2024 theme, Building a Digital Tomorrow, Public-Private Investments and Global Collaboration for Digital Readiness, is a timely and crucial one. Governments, businesses, and civil society organizations must work together in new and innovative ways to create the enabling environment that is necessary for digital transformation to thrive. The public sector provides the policy framework and incentives for developing digital infrastructure, while the private sector brings in their expertise and financial resources to develop infrastructure, products, and services. This way, the strategic collaboration can unlock the full potential of the digital era. That is why UNESCO organized the first edition of the Digital Transformation Dialogues in March of this year with the theme, Building an Inclusive Digital Future. We brought together multiple stakeholders from all over the world to UNESCO's headquarters in Paris to chart a collective pathway to a digital future that is grounded in human rights and that leaves no one behind. Apart from multi-stakeholder cooperation, we must also work together across borders. At UNESCO, we firmly believe in the role of global digital cooperation to propel us towards achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We remain committed to advancing the mandate for digital cooperation coming from the Global Digital Compact adopted by the United Nations General Assembly this past September, and also coming from the World Summit on the Information Society process. Let me also take this opportunity to announce that UNESCO is organizing, in close collaboration with the UNDP, ITU, UNCTAD, and UNDISA, a global forum on AI and digital transformation in the public sector. This forum will take place on February 12 and 13, 2025 in Paris. It will bring global experts together to address the critical need for capacity building and capacity development in the public sector to effectively leverage AI digital technologies, and data governance frameworks. Our overarching goal is not only to drive digital transformation in the public sector, but also to facilitate the creation of a sustainable, inclusive, human rights anchored, and evidence-based digital governance. Before concluding, let me zoom in on one of the pillars of the NRI, which is extremely important, the people dimension. To quote Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan Chase, who said, quote, "The future belongs to those who can rise above the technology and can master it." End of quote. At UNESCO, we believe that we need the right skills and competencies to effectively succeed in the digital transformation. UNESCO is thus committed to building capacities for civil servants, judicial operators, parliamentarians, electoral management bodies, and journalists worldwide to allow these stakeholders to harness the potential of digital technologies and artificial intelligence while mitigating the risks that come with them. With our competency framework on AI and digital transformation for civil servants, we help the public sector address the challenges underlined in the NRI, from data governance to bringing cultural shifts in governments towards more experimentation and agile policy making. We'll be training this and next year 25,000 civil servants globally so they can become ready for the digital transformation. Let me also mention that as of this year, our AI and the Rule of Law program has trained over 36,000 judicial operators from 160 countries on how AI can help the judiciary and what human rights challenges this technology is posing. Let's continue to work together to build a resilient and trustworthy digital future. Enjoy reading the 2024 NRI report, an excellent source of evidence to inform digital transformation and chart our collective direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tawfik, Jelassi, and your team for your visionary leadership at UNESCO and for supporting the NRI and its improvements year after year. I'm now pleased to give the floor to Yaron Shilat, Director of Innovation Policy at AWS, our knowledge partner for the second consecutive year. Yaron is here with us today. Yaron, thank you for traveling to be in the room with us. We're very much looking forward to your insights. Over to you.
Okay. Hello. You were waiting for my video, I guess. Okay, thank you very much for having us. I'm really excited to be here. And we're also very excited to see the 2024 NRI results, I guess, like all of us. But before that, I wanted to land 3 observations on this year's report and in general. So the first one is the approach to innovation. And I guess, you know, a couple of years ago when I met Professor Dutta and we were first talking about the opportunity to become a network contributor, the NRI contributor, we were really talking about innovation, and one of the things that I really was really coming to sense was that in fact it's an NII, a Network Innovation Index, because using the pillars and using the indicators, it's a really good kind of like North Star for governments and economies on how they're able to innovate. And looking back at Amazon, our CEO Andy Jassy, he likes to talk about the concept of primitive services. And what is a primitive service? That's a discrete foundational building blocks which are working together, and builders can weave them together into whatever they want to or imagine they can build. They're indivisible, okay? And the fact is that if you can split them into 2, they must be split into 2. And in that way, they can use them in whatever combination they desire. So you want to think about an example of what is a primitive service, and there are many examples across the Amazon services, beginning from marketplace and other services that we allow sellers to use. But one that's particularly close to me as somebody who works for AWS is AWS within itself. So in 2006, when we invented the concept of the cloud, the first service that we were actually bringing out to the market and that the developers were experiencing was the simple storage solution, or we call it the S3 because of the 3 S's. And that was very fascinating for builders, but they were also asking themselves and us, why limit it just to object storage? But the next year, when we released the Amazon SimpleDB database and also the cloud computing, the Elastic Compute Cloud, which is the EC2, they realized that there is a set of infrastructure of primitive services, which now allows them to really build in whichever way they want and think and can imagine, and not be limited by the restraints of hardware and data centers and putting all the money up front and investing in the people that need to manage it. And as you can recall, that brought a big boom of companies who were able to spring up and build on those primitive services. Big companies that we all know today, we can't imagine the world without, like Instagram, Airbnb, Netflix, Dropbox, big companies that came to massive scale because of this ability. And I'm drawing back now to the NRI. In fact, it's pretty much like the primitive services. If you look at the indicators, it's something that governments and economies can really do their best effort to excel at. And we heard, India, we heard Serbia, how they're trying to do that. It doesn't predict, their success. It doesn't guarantee it, but they can use it in every way imaginable. And mainly, it will be their Northern Star. It will be their, kind of like excellent compass of how they can really, drive innovation within their economies. So that's the first observation. Secondly, this year the NRI is talking about, very important aspect of PPP, public-private partnerships. And I think, if you look over the years, countries like Singapore and the USA, and we heard India, who are really ranking high or improving their standings, they're really doing great things using the PPPs, right? They're integrating AI and they're using IoT, Internet of Things, in order to improve essential areas like healthcare, education, and governance. And at AWS, we've witnessed really the firsthand, the transformative power of PPPs. I'll just use PPPs. It's much, it's easier. We have a rule in Amazon. You say the acronym once, and then you just go ahead with it. But we also learned, and we had lots of learnings about, how we can harness PPPs in order to create, the better good for economies. And one of the main learnings that we had is that you need to have a shared values and a shared vision and commitments between all of the players in the PPPs in order to create a global collaboration. And this is where cloud computing comes in. This allows, the cloud service providers, these are enabling governments to expand the services and provide on-demand and scalable solutions across all sectors. And I'll give you 3 examples. The first one is the AWS GovTech, Government Technology Accelerator for startups, and that's helping address justice and public safety challenges. And earlier this year, we also announced the AWS Public Sector Generative AI Artificial Intelligence Impact Initiative. That's a 2-year, $50 million commitment in order to help public sector organizations accelerate and adopt generative AI innovation, again, in order to improve government services. Another, I think, very nice example of bringing together, the force of minds, academia, biggest industry players, AWS technology, and public funding is the ION Labs. I don't know if any of you have heard of ION Labs. It's where Pfizer, Merck, and AstraZeneca came in together, backed also by AWS technology and our expertise in the specific vertical of healthcare. And we are working together to scout the best researchers, also from Oxford, to specific goals or open calls that we have created with this consortium every time to address the world's biggest problem. It could be Alzheimer, it could be diabetes, and it can be, of course, cancer. The biggest problems, where drug discovery is using AI in order to create startups which will tackle these problems. It's a really fascinating use case, and I really advise you to do that. And like I said, this can only happen with the flexibility of cloud computing, which allows for the rapid deployment of innovative technologies. And this is the reason that this year we're really applauding the Portulans Institute, and thank you guys and for taking the dive deep on this, for the first time ever to have the public cloud computing industry as a key indicator for digital readiness. So if you read the report carefully, you will find a direct line between innovation and the countries that secured the top spot for this new indicator. And lastly, and the last observation I want to talk about is, of course, impact. And we talked about the impact of technology. And we do have a panel, which I hope we will, kind of like elaborate on that. So beyond the direct contribution to economic growth, there are many, many reports out there, and you can see it. The industry-leading report about cloud computing, about AI. But I also want to talk about, and I think Professor Dutta talked about it, is how technology provides resilience to countries in times of need. And the two recent examples, I'll talk about Valencia, the devastating floods in Valencia. We were able to partner with Fundación Altios. I don't know if you heard about them, but within 48 hours, we have created an aid hub, which was able until now to rapidly supply 25 trucks with 100,000 essential items, and many more trucks are on their way. And another example, and that's much more heavily focused on technology, is in Ukraine, which since the beginning of the war, we've been working with the government of Ukraine, and we've been working also with the private sector to move countless data, 15 petabytes of data out of the country in order to secure that data and to ensure its resiliency. And this way, by doing that, we preserve the Ukrainian government's data in order to create services and to maintain services, which will be much needed, as the country rebuilds itself. Things important as land registration, dozens of years of research that the researchers have been building on. And with an optimistic note, I'll just say that last year we have commissioned a report that's also been getting feedback in Europe from industries, from business, from citizens about the AI technology. And that report has revealed that the power of AI until 2030 can unleash 600 billion euros worth of economic growth. That's a lot of money. If it continues the appetite for AI adoption of last year. This is something that, we are able to do together, as part of this NRI. We will need to tackle, and I'll put on, Professor Dutta put on his two hats before, I'll put on my policy hat. We will need to tackle, I think, 3 main issues, and that's part of the, collaborative work that we're doing with Portulans. One is we really need to tackle and to advocate for a regulatory environment that will support innovation and experimentation. And I'm really, looking forward to working with the team on that. We need to address the digital skills gaps, and we need to make sure that business of all sizes, not just the big company, but also the SMEs who are the driving force for prosperity, are actually able to put their hands on the technology and adopt it in a meaningful way. So I'll end with that, and I'll thank you very much. I'm looking forward for this day, and looking forward for a productive year ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Yaron, and the entire team at AWS for your invaluable support over the last couple of years. Cloud computing does play a pivotal role in digital transformation processes, and we're very excited to have introduced new cloud-related indicator in the NRI this year. And Rafael will tell you more about that in a bit. And we're very much looking forward to continuing this partnership and pushing the limits of what we can achieve together. Now, it's finally time to reveal the findings of the 2024 report. We'll discover which economies are leading the way in network readiness, explore key findings and data, shaping the digital landscape worldwide. For this, I welcome to the stage Rafael Escalona Reynoso, CEO of Portulans Institute. But before that, we'll play a very short video for you, revealing top 10 economies of the Network Readiness Index this year.
Well, thank you everyone for being here today. We are very excited to show these results a little bit more in detail, but as you can tell right now from the story that you just saw, we see that mostly, if not actually all of them, are high-income economies. So we've heard from our partners, we've heard from the policymakers that spoke before us, the importance of promoting new technologies and to have the appropriate regulatory frameworks to do so. So I'm going to try to tell you a little bit more of a fun story of this, instead of just showing you results and telling you what we found. So long story, we're going to talk about these three things. We're going to talk about, first of all, what the NRI is. Then we'll talk about the theme a little bit. So I'll try to do this very quickly. We'll talk about the rankings, and then finally we'll talk a little bit about the findings, the takeaways, and what we identify within all these results. So we've heard what the Network Readiness Index is, right? This is the story that Soumitra mentioned before. So again, this is a child of a past when technology was something as simple as the internet. Imagine that, as simple as the internet. Today, you will see in a moment some of the indicators that we're chasing to try to improve the measurement of this moving target. Technology is moving as we speak. So right now, as we finish the NRI, we're thinking about the new indicators that will help us measure the 2025 version of this. This is basically our story. You've heard it from Soumitra. Soumitra brought with him to Portulans the NRI, and he brought something very important too, along with Bruno Lanvan. He said, technology has an objective, and that objective is people. It's not necessarily just the technology per se. We're not talking just about indicators that measure, degrees of penetration of technology or how many people are using the internet. We actually are trying to measure too how people benefit from this technology. So that is an essential part of this new version of the NRI that was revamped in 2019, bringing this element that measures people and also measures the impact on the SDGs that we, as heard before, we're a little bit behind in what we thought we would be, where we would be at this time. So 4 pillars: technology, people, governance, and impact. 12 sub-pillars, 54 indicators. So if you see this in more detail, apologies that the font's a little bit small, but this is the model we have in the report. But we go from access as the first one in technology to SDG contributions. So it's the whole range of technology, not only just the particulars of infrastructure and innovation, but also, again, how do technology impact on people. Now, this is my moving target, our moving target, rather. So think about this. Last year, and this is a funny story, somebody somebody asked a question about the NRI, when is this coming out? And for some reason, we disclosed 24 indicators. And they immediately called us back and said, hold on, you meant to say 58, didn't you? But no, we meant 54. And the reason why we meant 54 is because we have to adapt. We have to review some of the indicators that no longer are capturing what's new, no longer are capturing what we want to measure, and then we have to introduce these new measurements. So just think about this. Number of venture capital deals invested in AI. Very, very important, very relevant right now. So this is something that we just discovered. This is going in the business subpillar, also measuring with people. AWS, our fellows in AWS mentioned the public cloud computing market scale, which means this is the investment that the public sector introduces into cloud computing. Data capabilities is something that measures how an economy is doing into adapting onto all these technologies. And ICT patent applications makes a more focused understanding of the IP part of the index instead of just the ICT part. So let's think about how this relates to our theme. Now we're talking about public-private partnerships, and then we added this part of digital. So DPPPs. So we'll talk digital PPPs in this whole idea. So just think about this. Infrastructure. How many times have you fallen into a pothole and say, oh my God, my car's broken or something happens? Maybe even you blow your tire and you have to be there for hours. No? Just imagine that infrastructure, but that infrastructure we don't see, it's there. Now we take it for granted. So imagine the generations, the ones that are before, not before, after us, that they're born there. That's the reality. That's their infrastructure. A pothole is the internet not working for 5 minutes, for a minute and a half. So these partnerships, the importance of having this, building this group of partnerships, is to try to enhance this infrastructure that's behind the scenes. Now, this is the importance of course, the terminology of the cloud. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about several things. You'll hear me say education, health, technology, innovation several times today, but these are the things that impact the most. Now, we're talking about financial models. Education, we saw what happened with COVID. Healthcare, all the research, the age-driven research, and climate actions. We were talking about Valencia. This is something that is extremely important, and we'll be talking about resilience and digital readiness and future readiness, which is another term that we have. So now, well, of course, we have the how we push the frontier to understand things when we think about this connection between the public and the private sector to cooperate. We're transforming public services, international cooperation, and capacity building. But if you think about this, we're sharing the risk. Humans, as we all are here, well, hopefully there's no robots here. Sorry if I offend anyone. We're very bad at statistics. If we think about this, every time we buy the lottery, we will win the lottery. That's a fact. And every time we travel, oh, the plane is probably going to crash. We're really bad statisticians. So what happens here is, if we understand risk properly, and we can split that risk, what we can do is, have a better analysis of reality. So if we do this, not only we have a better understanding of what we can do, but also we can share any of the risks and, of course, create more benefits for everyone. Now, let's talk about the rankings really quick. So what happens here is what I was telling you earlier. We see 3 economies from different continents in the top 10. The top 3, rather. The US, Singapore, and Finland. Of course, if you see as I mentioned earlier, all high-income economies, mostly European, are the top 10. We have China breaking into further closer to the top 10, 17, coming closer from the 20th. And then we have economies like Rwanda that are making enormous leaps. I'll show you in a second a little bit more of what Rwanda and other economies in the region of Africa are doing that is it's very worth highlighting. Now, think about these different areas. Technology, of course, the US, Switzerland, again, the Netherlands. Then people, we see most of Southeast Asia. Governance, the European Union, as well as impact. And take a quick look at Ireland, for example, and remember Ireland. We'll talk about this in a second. Now, income group, of course, we see Rwanda. This is the highlight here, is to see the low income and the lower middle. Rwanda, Uganda, and Malawi are doing extremely well with very little resources. So they're being very efficient with the amounts of resources. And if we were to contrast that to other economies that have twice or 5 times the resources, we can see that they might not be as efficient. And I'll show you a list in a second. I'll just mention that. China's moving very closely, so it's breaking this gap between the high income and the middle income, and as well as Malaysia. Ukraine, even through this whole process, we see that they're still doing very well, outperforming many things. Vietnam, Kenya, Rwanda, etc. But also we see India as one of the economies that actually made a very, very good leap this year. And also because we are more capable of measuring how things are being done. So let me explain a little bit of this. So this chart, although it looks very convoluted and very small, basically what it shows a trend line. And it shows those economies that are beyond the trend line, above of it, at a certain level. Those are the economies that are doing better with less. So those economies are achieving a higher level of readiness. And surprisingly, those are mostly lower middle income economies, and mostly from the African and Southeast Asia regions. So this is something that is very, very important to highlight. Of course, there are a ton of high income economies up there. But then there's this other thing that I wanted you to hear about. We see these achievers doing a lot more with less. But then we see a series of other economies that are slowing down. And when we see this economy slowing down, we may think, well, what is happening here? How come economies like Ireland, like Qatar, like Bahrain, Croatia, Kuwait, we find that they are slowing down because they're using their resources not as efficiently as some of the African or the Southeast Asian economies. So that is an interesting story, and it's a little bit of food for thought, because we need to understand a little bit further what is happening with this combination of things. So economies that are going beyond expectations, we have, again, the African, Kenya, Rwanda, China, of course, Vietnam, and Ukraine. But besides that, let's think about the messages that we found here. So these are our main messages. So let me just stand here, and I'm going to try to do this very effectively and a little bit more executive. So when we think about public and private partnerships, we can think about how these have the capacity to advance these technologies with the breakthrough of these risks. So we don't have to be aligning certain goals. When the government is doing only the expenditure, it becomes a problem. Or when you have a smaller type of organization and you don't have the capacity to do the investment, then you have to find these partnerships. But there's another element here that is very important, which is not only governments and small industries or private industries play a role here. They also large international organizations like, for example, the World Bank, the OECD, they also play a role in this, and they bring in together this triad of working capacities that allow to produce much more robust arrangements between these groups. Now, I'm going to go really fast on the next one because I just realized there's a small typo. Hopefully you can identify this. So don't focus on the typo, but rather think about the resilience that happened during this time. This was an enormous detonant to identify this public-private partnership, especially in digital. We heard it from our fellow from AWS how a series of small experiments became reality. And we saw solutions for, again, healthcare, education, and things that we would not be able to do without the effect of this enormous problem that we experienced all. Of course, we see all these changes too, and the things that how things in rural places like Zimbabwe, Lesotho, they began breaking those gaps on information and distribution and helping financial resources get to the actual points where they need to get with these new partnerships. Now, the regulatory frameworks is an essential part of what we are talking about. Again, the institutions, international institutions like OECD, World Bank play a big role here. But we have to be very aware that institutions are extremely important for digital PPPs to eventually thrive and grow and be actually existent. So we heard it from Brazil, we heard it from India, and what we want to emphasize very much in this report is that we need to have very solid institutions that, rather than reverse them, have very solid institutions so that these type of arrangements can eventually become something that benefits the economy globally and regionally. So again, they're extremely important for us and for the world to have these type of agreements, especially when it comes to digital, so that some of these sustainable development goals that we're quite behind in some can be much more achievable. Now we have the technologies to do so, and we have to be able to come together to do this. We've seen examples of education in Singapore and Rwanda, etc., where they're leveraging this type of agreements. So again, transformation. When it comes to financial resources, this is the point of inflection. So if you think about AI, when you think about AI as this element, this new transformative power, you may think about this as a little chat box, or I don't know, something that helps you with your, a little task or editing things. But in reality, it has enormous capacity, and it's everywhere. But many times we forget that without things like cloud computing, we would not be able to have AI. So if we think about AI as the individual, the soul would be cloud computing. So that is where AI exists. So trying to build the capacity, expanding this type of capacity and technologies globally, this is something that is critical for the development not only of growth in economic development, for the expansion of the technology, but also to create more coordination between the several groups that are part of these agreements. And I think this is my last one. So again, the public engagement is also critical. When we have this public private participations in partnerships in digital, we make a world that is a little bit more democratic. We become a little bit more able to talk with different people. This is something that we've experienced everywhere. We've experienced this we saw it in the elections in the US. When we don't have the capacity to talk to other people, and we don't have the agreements to make partnerships together or to develop certain things, because we don't have the technologies or the wills. But if we do have the technologies, we can create digital partnerships that go beyond, just creating money. This can be something that relates to individuals, people, and democracy throughout the world. So the importance of DPPs is extremely very well highlighted in the report. And I invite you all. This is my last slide. I invite you all to see the report. And there's one more thing I want to mention today, which is we're very happy about this, because a report that's digital has to be digital and take advantage of technology. And we think that having a report that comes every 12 months is something that is digital, but there's a lot of cleaning and data, there's a lot of work to be done throughout 6-7 months. But we wanted to leverage AI too, no? Not only just have a small area, three indicators. So now when you visit the NRI's website, you can interact with our AI chatbot. So now we have integrated AI, so if you have any question, you don't need to ask me anymore. You can just go to the website and ask this little thing, saying, can you contrast this? Can you tell me the rank of that? And you will have a nice interaction with that. So I invite you both to both check the report in PDF, and please check our website too, and chat with our bot, see what it says. Thank you so much, everyone.
Well, thank you, Rafael, for your very comprehensive presentation. You've given us quite a few interesting topics and points to focus on, and I don't mean the typo. That just goes to show that your presentation wasn't AI generated and then you actually worked on it. So that's a good thing, I guess, in the era of generative AI. It's now time to shift, and I also echo Rafael and say that please visit our website at www.networkreadinessindex.org and explore, download the report for free, all of the data sets, etc. It's now time to shift to our panel of experts who will discuss the critical role of public-private partnerships in building and advancing digital readiness. When we had the first prep call for our panel, I was fascinated by the amount of knowledge and experience that they all bring to the table. So I guarantee that we are in for a very interesting discussion, which will be followed by the Q&A session. So please take advantage of that. So now I would like to hand it over to Professor Soumitra Dutta, who will introduce his panelists for all of you.
Well, thank you very much. And can I request my panel members to just come and to have a seat, please? So we have 4 distinguished panel colleagues. And the first thing I'll do is request you to just, of course, we can read your names and titles, but I would love to hear a little bit more in terms of your richness of your experience. So just give us a flavor of what you bring to the panel. Why don't we begin with you?
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Mushka Heller. I lead research and analysis for AWS Economic Development. And I guess I've spent most of my life going back and forth between the public and private sector at the nexus of innovation and public policy. I was the Economist's first data protection officer, and we were looking at the impact of big data, worked on the GDPR and questions like data privacy and security. I was a trade commissioner for the government of Canada and built out the first few smart neighborhoods and smart infrastructure technologies. Then at the World Economic Forum, I led transportation portfolio, and now at AWS, the research and analysis that we do seeks to understand the economic impact of our actions in different communities where we go around the world.
Great, wonderful. José Ramón.
Okay, I'm José Ramón López Portillo. I've been a public servant, diplomat, entrepreneur, and also an academic. And I've specialized on STI and policy making. I've contributed to the 10-member group of the Technology Facilitation Mechanism of the United Nations, and recently I'm part, among other things, of the AI Safety Summit and its science report. I've been working on STI for quite a while, and innovation for the SDGs. I've written a book about these things and articles, etc. And I'm fascinated by what the index tells us about the world, the present and the future. So
Okay, wonderful. Kat.
Thanks very much. I feel entirely inadequate compared to my fellow panelists' experience. I'm Kat Sommer. I run government affairs for NCC Group, which is a UK-headquartered, globally operating cybersecurity company. We are at the heart of the whole of society approach to cybersecurity that the UK government have set out, that is accepted in the Western world as a way in which to improve cyber resilience as the fundamentally underpinning principle of a digital economy. And a lot of my work focuses on bringing technical expertise into the policy-making process and making a contribution as an industry operator within cybersecurity to enhancing the capacity and the capability of the public sector in promoting cyber resilience.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm Chris Ferguson. I'm the Vice President of Apolitical, a company which is a startup which has been set up to help civil servants around the world solve the hardest policy problems there are. But I was also the Director of the Government Digital Service, and I have the honour of being the longest serving senior civil servant in the Government Digital Service. I was there for nearly 10 years, from the immediate aftermath of the financial crisis, through Brexit, through the pandemic. I was the head of the digital data and technology profession for the UK government, and I was the chair of the UK government's Digital Leaders Council, which gathered the sort of 56 digital leaders across parliament, departments, and arm's length bodies as well.
So you see why I did not try to summarize their backgrounds. So they have a wealth of experience out here, and they haven't shared everything, because, for example, Jose Ramon, he attended the Bletchley Summit. He also was a very high-ranking leader in the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, so he knows all the multilateral organization worlds. And our colleagues also have done a lot of interesting work. So let me begin. By the way, I will bring you into the discussion pretty soon, so I will not wait for the very end. So we'll try and intersperse some discussion with colleagues, the audience, and back and forth. So let me first of all just begin with a very simple question. Is there a difference between a partnership, a procurement, or some other kind of word that you might use out there for this public-private collaboration? Who wants to take it?
I can kick that off. So I have thoughts about this. I think there are nuances to that question, and I think overall there are probably three models by which you can class procurement or partnership or collaboration. One is the pure procurement that government undertakes to solve a specific problem. There are ways in which that procurement can be structured in innovative ways that facilitates better outcomes, that allows the private sector to innovate, that allows the private sector to be a strategic partner, but at the end of the day, at the heart of it is a procurement tender process, the exchange of money takes place, and the private sector industry will deliver a solution that the public sector cannot provide or doesn't want to provide on its own. The second element is this idea of co-design and co-innovation, where the public sector might come up with a certain outcome that they want to achieve without necessarily prescribing what the solution to that should be. So again, public money is being made available, government commissions something, the private sector has the freedom to innovate and deliver and do things in a more maverick and potentially more creative way than a public sector ever could. And we have examples, particularly in the research space and in the sort of piloting digital infrastructure, so Open RAN, 5G pilots that I think go into that co-innovation, co-design space. And then the third element is the true collaboration, where no money changes hands, really, and what brings public and private sector together is a shared sense of purpose and a shared sense of objective to achieve a particular impact, a particular public good or outcome. And some of the examples that we heard about from the various people who we saw on screen earlier, I think fit into that category, and often they are around information sharing, around pooling capacity, pooling capability, around things like secondments And I think particularly in the cyberspace, we are seeing quite a lot of that in terms of information sharing. The UK National Cybersecurity Centre has introduced from its outset Industry 100 as a secondment program, which very deliberately takes advantage of private sector expertise and private sector capability. There are similar examples in other jurisdictions. So the Netherlands have introduced Project Melissa, for example, which is all about fighting ransomware and bringing in the various partners in cyberspace that have a contribution to make. And we've also seen a couple of very effective law enforcement operations recently that rely on private sector intelligence for their takedown actions. And I think when we talk about public-private partnership and digital public-private partnership, focusing on where we can take that collaboration mechanism more so than the other two is a really fascinating avenue to explore, where you remove the financial incentive and the commercial considerations and truly focus on that shared sense of purpose and the shared sense of desire to make an impact.
Wonderful.
I get off my soapbox now.
So that's a very helpful, actually, laying of the land in one perspective. Chris, do you agree from that, from years of government experience?
Yes, I agree with those kind of three stratifications. I think what I would add to that is it's complicated for an official because whenever there's any kind of value exchange between the public and private sector, there are any number of people who are not involved in that who might want to be. And so you're working on behalf of the taxpayer, you're trying to be fair about the way in which you're giving your time for free to industry. And often around innovative spaces and areas, you have things that are in search of use cases. I lived through cybersecurity as a vogue, digital transformation, cyber, blockchain, and the early stages of AI. And there's loads of people coming to you, and they're often not coming to you with clear application. They're coming to you with an offer of consultancy to help explore government problems to see where this solution might be useful. And that's not always useful. And government is not always the best or an intelligent customer or a joined up customer of these things. I remember there were about 6 simultaneous very large blockchain studies going on in different departments in government. So I think it's important to understand that there is low discoverability in government of what else is actually going on out there. So IBM could go to multiple departments and do the same thing multiple times. And so I think one of the big things about partnerships would be to kind of have a way of aggregating the needs of government's end users, like by having a government digital service, a central capability and understanding that can then say, right, this is what we want on behalf of the public. We would like the taxpayer really to explore this once with their money, and then we'll go from there. So I think that's that coordination point and that ability to aggregate the need that we're actually trying to meet is a really important thing to have, even as you're exploring that all refine.
Jose Ramon, from your going back to your life in the FAO, all the global multilateral organizations, they really involve these kind of partnerships. How do you see partnerships from that perspective, the elements that was mentioned earlier?
Yeah, certainly. Well, normally PPPs emerge when there is a public good, national priority, or a global goal to be achieved. And of course, that creates a synergy, and public and private initiatives are brought together, and something should happen. However, some of the experiences have not been that successful, so that some governments, as is the case of Mexico, I can say, and I will give you a specific practical example here, are not satisfied with the fact that the government, the state, has to risk in that partnership in order to guarantee the success of the private initiative. And in many cases, the profit has been guaranteed by the government in many ways, and actually profits have been beyond expectations, and they have all gone to the private sector. So as Professor Mariana Mazzucato once said, at some stages, neoliberalism has brought the socialization of risks, but not of profits or benefits. And that is why, in the case of the Mexican government, they want to stop the public-private partnership and make it into public-private alliance where the state doesn't risk and doesn't guarantee the success of the private company or whatever. And I have actually, I mean, this is an initiative, that's why you can see there, director of Lobster Tail. And this is a new digital initiative where we have actually proposed a model for us to be included in that alliance, which is different, you see. What we're going to do...
So, sir, let me just hold you out there because we'll come back to what is coming up.
Okay.
But you introduce a new word, alliance, out here now in the mix.
Yes.
So, but clearly I think you touched upon some very important example. Mushka, let me just ask you a related question. Jose Ramon is going into that. Can you think of an example? I want examples of what you think was an interesting example of this digital public-private partnership. I'm sure Amazon has called into many. And if you can, just identify for us, describe what it is, and identify either a key lesson, successful or unsuccessful.
So first, actually, I do need to present a slightly different perspective on public-private partnerships.
Okay.
As somebody who comes from the infrastructure industry, public-private partnerships are, for many infrastructure companies, fundamental financial models that allow to take on development projects that could not otherwise be taken on. And so it is just a way to divvy up risk and to divvy up spending and allocate capital. I wanted to present that as a more pragmatic version of it.
Can I stop you one second? I'll come back to you. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's hard to disagree with, but I think it comes down to, again, the savviness of on the customer side, because I think that could be the intention, but correctly sequenced and correctly phased, governments, the states, can get what they need out of an engagement. The problem for me always comes when there's a too big a commitment up front to go down a technology road or exploring it.
Because what she's doing is making it very simple.
Mm-hmm.
She's saying actually just risk assessment, just risk division.
And there are many different models for that, what that financial model can look like. There are different playbooks. There are whole conferences about it. But Canada, for example, develops a lot of its infrastructure through public-private partnerships, has essentially written the playbook on P3s from a financial perspective. The US has argued, I'm staying in high income economies so that we can be more apples to apples. The US has argued for the pros and cons of this, but then has also come to the side of, yes, there are playbooks that can be followed in order to bring together something of a new magnitude. So for example, the LaGuardia Airport project, the JFK Airport project, for the public-private partnerships. And so, yes, of course, there is a question of savviness. There is also a question of knowledge sharing. And there is also, I think we need to acknowledge that something that might sound very complicated can also be simplified and empowered.
Okay, so you mentioned LaGuardia, and certainly that's a much needed improvement in the US, at least New York infrastructure. But let me ask you the question, is there a difference in your view between infrastructure like a road or a highway, kind of a public-private partnership, versus a digital public-private partnership? Do you see any differences?
I do, in the sense that I think that public perception distinguishes between those two. Mm-hmm. I think that when we talk about anything digital, then there is a lot of emotion that enters the equation. And I think that there is a lot of hope and a lot of fear of missing out that enter the equation as well. When we talk about a road, it sounds like we're talking about something concrete enough, neutral enough, objective enough that we can all agree. But once we start talking about the ability to work remotely or to have access to broadband, and you mentioned in your report, you mentioned higher economies and lower income economies. And I think that even within higher income economies, there are large digital divides that exist. And so automatically it becomes very personal, and automatically it also becomes fuzzier. It's something we know less well. So are we talking about an alliance to establish new regulations? Are we talking about a lobbying effort around something like the GDPR? Are we talking about hard infrastructure building of different networks or data centers and so on and so forth? What are we talking about? because I don't think that digital is a good enough umbrella word for the universe that's behind it.
So digital, is it more emotional? Is it more, I mean, you do a lot of cybersecurity, for example, yeah.
I think I agree with Mushka that it's less tangible and more multifaceted in very many ways, because you can talk about the underlying digital infrastructure, which is probably telecoms networks, which kind of gets us back to there is something being built that you can see, and sometimes that's poles on the streets or whatever it might be. There is then the digital adoption, digital skills layer to allow populations to take advantage of whatever digital infrastructure is there. That's probably less tangible, and you still need a partnership approach in making that happen, because that's not necessarily something that any part of the overall ecosystem can deliver. I really like the whole of society approach that's been sort of coined in the cybersecurity world, because I think that the recognition has been that it is a wide ecosystem of players that are involved in improving cybersecurity, or making digital infrastructure more cyber resilient, and being quite clear about what the respective responsibilities are, and ensuring that the various actors in the ecosystem understand their responsibilities and can make their respective contributions. Probably not what we traditionally talk about in terms of public-private partnership, but it is still the public and the private sectors working in partnership, if you wanted to pick it apart like that.
So I would possibly substitute the word emotional for human. I think that when you're talking about classic PPP, you're looking at bridges and hospitals and buildings, infrastructure like that. When you're talking about digital and transformation, yes, there is an infrastructure element, there's a plumbing aspect. But when you're talking about the service layer on top of that, that is incredibly human. It needs to be designed for human beings. It needs to be understood that the rapid pace of consumer technology change means that the human expectation that you have to meet with services is going to change. Between 2010, 15, 2020 and today, you've gone from iPhone 3G to AI assistants popping up everywhere, including on www.networkreadiness.com. But and that's a huge change, and it's I understand the word emotional, but it's just humanity, and it's about adapting to the human aspect of your service layer, which sits on the infrastructure. And there is still an infrastructure layer, absolutely there is, which is can be a bit more long term, but the agility needed to keep that human layer, the service layer, moving and adapting and changing, I think it is a different beast.
I think Muchka wants to say something.
Oh no, I just wanted to clarify to Chris, you are talking to a French woman, so emotional and human, But I appreciate the British nuance.
Yes, Jose.
I think it is more...
You bring in the Mexican angle.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of emotion, of course, here. But I think it is more the complexity, the uncertainty, the ignorance around digital projects. It's not as straightforward as building a road, In a road, you have cars that will go through, and they can be charged X amount. Here, the providers of the service and the users of the service are so complex and so mobile, because technology is changing at an hourly base here. And so there's a lot of unpredictability around these projects, so that when you have a PPP, you face all this. And you have to define very clearly what is it that you want to achieve. And that is precisely when you give me the chance, I will describe what I've been doing in Mexico.
I know you're yearning to describe it, so we'll come to you in a second for that. You talked about the road projects being simple, but if you look at what road projects are in Oxford, I think Oxford, we are suffering from several construction projects which seem to be highly unpredictable. So we've heard a few interesting themes coming out here. The whole issue of purpose, the whole issue of division of risk, the issue of sort of somehow having the human aspect and the uncertainty perhaps in digital elements. Let me ask you to identify, once again, go back to my question, identify a lesson from one example. So what works or does not work in the case of digital PPPs, and give an example just to relate to it.
I think, on a concrete level, in order to have cloud, in order to have AI/ML, you need data centers. And I think that for a lot of those data centers, we essentially enact public-private partnerships, right? We essentially collaborate with the government of a community where we are building to enable a project of a magnitude that's just very hard to comprehend. In terms of a project or an outcome that can come out of something like that, there are two that I like to think about. One is, I love the infrastructure of data center, the economics of it, because when we talk about the digital transformation revolution, we often think about white-collar jobs. We often think about high-income jobs. The people building data centers, those are blue-collar employees. Those are plumbers, electricians, construction workers who can revive all of their, not just their direct economy, but the whole economy of their neighboring community because of such a project. And so I find that tremendously exciting. We talked about upskilling, and whenever you have, like a business that comes in order to invest that much to create cloud infrastructure, oftentimes, like we often do at AWS, there are upskilling programs that come in as well, and that play a tremendous role in accelerating the adoption of cloud and cloud-based AI. But the other thing is, concretely, what cloud enables us to do, what this digital transformation enables us to do, it enables us to cross the borders of worlds that were previously really well-defined. So we have, for example, at AWS, we have enabled a collaboration between NVIDIA and NYU Langone, and they were able to share the world's largest longitudinal database on cancer treatments, and that contributed then to tremendous progress, right? Like in health. So I look at it from like that whole cycle, from finding a job for John Doe, who, and we hear of it all the time, could not turn the lights on in the morning, and then like gets a job or like gets one of our trainings to be able to become a plumber in a data center, and then can turn the lights on, all the way to large medical databases that save lives. And to me, it's everywhere on those dimensions.
Okay, great. Jose Ramon, now you can talk about examples that you're yearning to talk about.
No, it's okay. No, I can give you an example of a digital project that was not as effective, which is digital government. In Mexico, about 8-9 years ago, they started this project with a PPP, and they thought, well, we just digitalize and everything by magic will happen. Well, what that did was extrapolate all the vices, of the administrative way of functioning of the government. So silos emerged, and corruption emerged, and all sorts of crazy things. So the digital government was, well, I don't want to say percentage, but not fully achieved, And that and other similar experiences made the present government change its way of looking at this. We need to guarantee, as the state, we need to guarantee the public good. But we don't want to risk and pay for your errors and your lack of vision or your deficient business model, etc. So what has emerged? Well, you have a state majority enterprise, so it has more than 51% of the shares, and the company that is going to operate has the rest, and this gives a contract, an operational contract to the private business, and it not guarantees but gives concessions, permits, all that's needed, use of tariffs, etc., so that they can earn or have the return, the rate of return expected, and all that plus its obligations will go to a trust fund, and the trust fund will manage both the income or the return and also the cascade of payments, first operation, etc., then the banks, then investors, etc. And if there's a remnant, that remnant might be distributed within this how to say umbrella company. Okay, that can be very risky for. I mean, it was not the government; it was us who proposed it. I mean, as a private sector, we proposed it, and we are moving in that regard.
Has it been done before?
Yes, partly, but not in the digital, in airports. And you can say that the Norway Statoil and also some, Singapore and also Brazil have some examples in that regard. But this is new. And of course, you can be afraid of that. But if you do your homework correctly, you will guarantee that the public good is achieved and also the private profit. And what is the company? It is a digital company that will link Western United States, let's say Los Angeles, with the western coast of Mexico, through the Isthmus of Tehuantepec into the Gulf of Mexico, and then back to Houston. You see, it's called lobster because it's like that. But I mean,
that's a specific example you're giving that you're trying to implement right now.
Yes.
Okay, great,
that's
wonderful.
Right. And it is moving.
Kat, an example and a lesson.
I'm going to talk about Industry 100 because that is an example that I know very well, and I think an example that has been very successful. So when the National Cybersecurity Centre was formed about 7 years ago, they, from the very outset, said we want to collaborate with industry. As we all know, cyber skills, cyber capacity is pretty limited. It's a very scarce resource, so the NCSC, as part of GCHQ, said we want to very openly engage with industry and use their expertise and their capabilities to help us meet our mission. They called it Industry 100 because they wanted to attract 100 people from industry to support it. There was discussion about whether they should call it Industry 50 to be less ambitious, but they just set it out. In the 2023 annual review, so last year's annual review from the NCSC, they had 123 secondees from industry. And I think there's 3 factors that made it a success. One is that shared sense of purpose and that shared sense of mission. So the NCSC exists to make the UK the safest place to live and work online. Everyone who signs up to Industry 100 signs up to that mission and believes in that mission. And that is a really, really strong motivator for many. The second related aspect is that the moment you walk through the doors of the NCSC, you leave your commercial hat at the door. So everyone who walks in and supports Industry 100 is there as part of the national mission. The current CTO of the NCSC used to describe it as the Switzerland of cyber, because your affiliation doesn't really matter and we're all on neutral ground while we're supporting the mission. And then the third aspect is trust, and having the patience to build the trust between ultimately the intelligence community and industry, and accepting that everyone is there for the same reasons or for the same purpose. And there's a really interesting experience I had, because the Industry 100 model has attracted international attention. You've got lots of international delegations coming to the UK to learn about what the NCSC have done and how they've done it. And I sat in the cyber dialogue with Singapore where that model was being described. And the Singaporean delegation, reflecting on what they heard, said, we have so much to do in changing our own perception of industry, because they see industry as the supplier base, not as a partner. And I think that's the sort of 3.5 lesson of why Industry 100 has worked, because industry is considered a partner, not just a supplier of stuff.
Okay, wonderful. Chris?
Okay, I'm going to talk about the single most effective thing that the UK government did in a decade. And it's got a nice piece of symmetry, because the person whose brainchild it was Liam Maxwell, who's now the global public sector lead at AWS. And what Liam introduced was something called spend controls. And this is a delegated power from the Treasury, which is a very rare thing, to the Government Digital Service, where a small team of experts essentially had anything above £0 being spent on digital data and technology in government had to be scrutinised and passed by this very small, very powerful, very knowledgeable group. And that had an enormous impact. I think in 2010, the UK's central government budget on IT was 16.5 billion. 5 years later, it was down to about 9.5, and that was the year before we were ranked #1 in the world by the UN, #2 at the OECD. So we almost halved the amount of money we were spending as central government IT, and we went to the top of the league table at the same time. But what that also prompted was, in partnership with procurement colleagues in the Crown Commercial Service, was we created the digital marketplace. And what we did was we took that 16.5 billion, almost all of it was going to about 16 vendors. But by 2015, more than half of it was going to SMEs. And we created a marketplace of about 5,000 companies inside the UK that were now winning government work. And most people know, you want growth, it comes from the companies of 5, 10, 15 people becoming 50, 100, not from the money heading overseas with huge multinationals. And it was those two things together had an astonishing impact. I won't pretend we planned, but we were able to look at and go, we actually established a program called the Global Digital Marketplace, where with 5 countries, we helped them to implement in 3 continents the same controls plus digital marketplace, sort of atomize their government vendor marketplace, but also put the constraints that would stop well-meaning, but just not intelligent customer civil servants who had basically just become big contract managers. They weren't CTOs, they just had billion-pound contracts with major organizations, and they just picked up the phone and said, there's a problem, you have to fix it. That's not the same thing as being a CTO. And so it was the combination of those two things had a transformative effect. And I can't stress enough, and I do this wherever I go in the world, how you buy deeply affects what you buy. If you do not have the freedom to go outside of the tram lines, then you're not going to buy outside of the tram lines, and you're leaving so much possibility on the table. And so when we're talking about PPP, there's a tendency to think of big. We need big. It's a big deal. It's a Crossrail. It's a hospitals. It's blah blah blah. It doesn't have to be big. And I think that idea of keeping it atomized, keeping it small, bearing in mind things can be done for less than 100 million. Things can be done by small companies, but you've got to break the lots up. You can't buy it all at once, and that requires you as an official to really understand what it is you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it, and to break the sequencing, and to not just do big bang procurement, and job done, thank goodness, hand it over to some poor schmo who's now got to deliver it. So that was the biggest thing we did as the UK.
No, I like that actually. How you buy influences what you buy. I'll remember that. I want to take a short break from the dialogue with our panel members and open it up to the audience and to our audience also online. So for audience online, please enter your questions, and then Mariam will in fact find a way to get them across to me. And here we have some hands, so maybe, do we have someone to take a microphone back there? I think there's a person. Okay, yeah, please, Kai.
Yeah, sure. I like Chris's example. I wondered if you used it on the NHS in the UK, because it just feels like I invest in small companies, so I see a lot of these startups that have these interesting. They're not even startups. They could be like 100 million valuation or something, but they just can't get into the NHS, right? They can't get in and experiment and start something, and then they always talk about the procurement department and the regulation around all the things that happen there. So that sounds like a good idea, though.
So that's an excellent point. So the answer is no. It didn't apply to NHS. So central government doesn't have the power and authority in the UK to compel things to happen at NHS, or actually at local government level. There were a lot of local government would use the digital marketplace that was created. By the way, that digital marketplace has since been shut down, which is incredibly tragic. It was a massively innovative, huge, the stats off the charts, but it was unique. The other 19 kind of procurement verticals did not operate that way, and they did not have delegated powers to experts. So it was stopped. So in that. Apathy had a big part of it. Like data.gov.uk was closed down, even though it was a massive open data sharing kind of portal. So the pandemic absorbed massive capacity into emergency service provision. And so some things with it on the vine, there's been less and less money every year. You know, digital transformation was a hot area 2010 to maybe 2015. Since then, it's been fighting with everyone else for funding to maintain its funding, let alone increase funding. So there are voluntary standards. Like what good looks like has been heavily codified and distributed and published by GDS, and other actors. But it has to be consumed. And many people do try. But there is, it's the classic, no one ever got fired for hiring IBM type mentality. That's the trouble. Whereas there are a number of exquisite organizations in this country, small design organizations, digital organizations, who could do the job. But if you have to have a 24/7, 365 call center capable of handling 50,000 calls a week as part of the lot, well, you ain't got that. So, so you're just ruled out immediately. And that kind of procurement mentality has started to creep back in. And that is an observation, not a criticism of colleagues in Cabinet Office and all that. It's a survival behavior. There are fewer and fewer people, there's less and less money, there's more and more, desperation and kind of pressure. So, like the things that really worked have started to fall by the wayside as the tides come back in and some old practices have re-emerged.
Okay, I saw a hand back there towards please.
Thanks very much for the presentation. I'm Utkarsh, I'm a PhD student here. I was wondering if there's a role of narratives in further strengthening the trust deficit that seems to still emerge when it comes to digital public-private partnerships. Do you think there's a room for better storytelling? Have, in your experiences, felt a bit of a narrative void?
Who wants to?
Well, I'll tell you about something that is in the report somehow, the role of international organizations and private-public partnership for the digital. I worked in the UN on innovation for the SDGs, which is one of your main worries here. How do countries that do not have the critical mass to generate digital solutions, go on with generating innovation that even reaches those communities that do not have economic worth or value. How do you do that? Well, if you have a problem in search of a solution that can tackle a problem, a solution to a problem that needs perfection or a technical expert, and then financing and so on and so forth, you can use the digital network in order to contact others who have found a solution, can provide financing, etc., etc. So just to cut the story short, because Mariam has, well, oh, okay, right, okay. We developed in the group of 10, and I was in charge of this thing, a network, digital network, with banks of innovation supported by innovation funds and ruled, let's say, or supervised by ethical councils within a network that would bring together all the innovators and those who need a solution and search for best examples, blah, blah, blah. The whole thing is there. But what I can tell you is that was approved within the United Nations. Mexico is a pilot country, and it can provide a wealth of information regarding who needs what are who are the innovators, which are the general ideas, which sectors, etc. And that is the kind of example of how the global community using, digital network preparedness can empower not only countries, but also communities, vulnerable communities that need a solution. They need to be integrated, even if they don't have access to the internet, you see? That's the point. Innovators can reach them in an indirect way and and seek for solution and attract money, etc., etc. And that is a perfect example of a public-private partnership, where the government induces a solution to these innovations. I mean, you can look at this in great detail later.
You made me think of a project that I was a part of when I was at the World Economic Forum. It was a project in Detroit, Michigan, in the United States. And what we wanted to do was to create an integrated platform that would be able to host every single mode of transportation within a single platform, so that you would be able to know, you will be able to solve problems like your last mile problem, or like know how to do like more complex routes without having to only rely on buses. So it sounds like a nice idea, right? And it sounds like a straightforward enough idea, and it sounds like a public-private partnership, and it was none of those things. But we, the forum at the time, we got involved because Detroit had expressed interest around that, and we, one of our partners was Siemens, who had a lot of the technological ability to deliver something like that. What we ended up kind of finding out was just the number of then government agencies, right, that had to be involved, and the different degrees at the city level, at the regional level. And then, of course, Detroit is close to Canada. Canada got involved. And then on the private side as well, there is a supply chain that gets integrated. So I thought it was very important when Chris mentioned the importance of SMEs and their role in being able to act fast and to deliver quick results. For us, AWS, whenever we go into a community, we activate a whole local supply chain of SMEs, right? And so you might think of things in a little bit more of a binary way of there is one private actor and one public actor, but I think what we are all finding out is it's more complex than that, it's more multidimensional than that, and IOs are certainly a huge part of it.
Well, India actually has a network of banks of ideas. It's called like that. It has been successful, as far as I can say.
Chris?
A very quick point on trust, which I was involved heavily in digital identity and things like that, and storytelling. I think one thing that's very interesting about trust is its portability. And as you think to big partnerships going forward, so again, with our Amazon colleagues in the room, I think of something like Alexa, okay? And now imagine Alexa wasn't from Amazon. Imagine it was government issued, a microphone, a video camera in your living room, in your kitchen, whatever. That's a strange thing, but more and more public services, I expect, going forwards, thanks to AI and everything else, are going to be delivered through partnerships with things like Alexa. And that's going to be interesting to see how the trust plays out there. If people have had an Alexa for a decade and suddenly it's helping deliver government services, that's going to be a really interesting thing. And I think, going back to my point about the humanity of the service layer, you've got infrastructure there, you've got devices, but it's going to be interesting, and that's going to be all about design, and it's going to be all about the messaging and the marketing and the hard work that's done to reassure people about privacy and about the trustworthiness of the service provision through all these new vectors. And obviously I'd extend that to the adoption and usage of AI in public services as well.
Can I, just double check with the original questioner. When you talked about the trust deficit, did you mean the lack of public trust in technology that slows technological adoption, or did you mean the trust deficit between the public and the private sector and actually working together to deliver better outcomes?
Yeah, I was actually referring to the public's lack of trust in institutions, and now I think tech seems to becoming institutionalized. And I think unless and until we learn to tell better stories and let stories from ground emerge, I think we might occasionally run the risk of shoving technology at people, which tends to backfire. That's where I was coming from. But some of these examples are very helpful.
Well, it depends on what kind of stories you also craft. We saw in the American politics recently, the stories can work either side. We have some questions from online audience. I'll let Sylvie read the questions out.
Sure, one at a time. Okay, so we have an online question. The first is, how can governments address data quality and management fundamentals to unlock the potential of things like AI, automation, and cyber resilience?
Who wants to go first?
I have a very short answer to that, and then my colleagues can be more verbose than I will be. I would say start by leveraging your private partners. It is in their interest, and they generally have the resources and the will to be right there and help you do that.
A very quick follow-up. I would agree with that. And I would say start by leveraging the people who own most of that data, which is the individual people in the UK. For me, the quickest way would be to say, right, it's your data, you own it, you keep it up to date, you keep it accurate, but make it straightforward and simple for people to do that through clear digital identity access to data, and then having the ability for when I update my data at the DVLA, that it flows across the whole network. Tell us once is a very straightforward principle that is adopted in many countries around the world. There's no reason we can't do it in the UK. And that way, you don't have any third parties. Because I remember, this is from very long ago, so I can probably use this number publicly. But I remember the DVLA quoted about it would cost, this is in about 2008, about £1 billion to have the database of drivers and details to actually cleanse that and have it up to date so it was actually 100% accurate. But without accurate data and pools of data, garbage in, garbage out, right, for AI and machine learning and all kinds of things. So, yeah.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I'll come at it from the cyber resilience angle again, because that's what I know. There is a real challenge in terms of broad visibility of cyber threat and cyber breach data, because individual regulatory authorities will record incidents. A lot of vendors in the market will publish their own data sets, largely for marketing purposes, because that drives business. So it's really hard to find comprehensive data sets looking at cyber resilience. So one of the ideas that's been kind of floating around and that we're advocating for at NCC Group is this idea of an Office for National Cyber Statistics that will consolidate and centralize data sets from vendors, from threat intelligence providers, from the regulatory authorities, to have, probably with an agreed methodology, a very clear national data set that, one, gives a broad visibility of the threat, but also can be tracked over time to assess whether interventions are actually working in terms of the reduction in the attack landscape and the breaches. How that would be set up, I'll defer to people like Chris or Mushka, who will have the underlying technical understanding to do that. But the consolidation of divergent and different and variable data sets in a central database and bringing that all together centrally is one of those ideas.
Okay, Jose Ramon?
Well, I look at it from a different point of view now. After 10 years of tenfold growth of compute based on data from all over the world without any real supervision of property rights, etc. All the data is really there. It has been masked by all sorts of things, but it leaks, and there's there's not much we can do about that leaking. Our privacy is being exposed. There are studies that tell you in 10 years everything is going to be transparent, just like during the Burgess Shale transition 530 million years ago, the sea became transparent, and ice appeared, etc. So this is unstoppable, I believe, and we can do whatever you want. But if the whole world doesn't unite in order to come to a series of governance and regulatory coincidences, and it implies, then there's nothing we can do. Really, someone is going to leak the information, and it's going to be unprotected, really. And it is too late. I mean, 10 billion times compute has grown in the last 10 years regarding training of LLMs. Tell me what we can expect.
We'll come and talk about AI and that in a second, a little bit more. But second question.
So the second question we have is, how do approaches to digital transformation differ between global powers like China and smaller nations? And what role should governments play in driving large-scale digital investment?
So this is one of the questions I was planning to ask. So the global aspect of it, because you talked about global collaboration, and the direction is not going that way.
Yeah, no, that is true. If I may, one of the best books, recent books about the digital empires is precisely Digital Empires by Anu Bradford, and it talks about U.S., China, and the European Union. They all have very different regulations and governance systems are actually divergent, if you may. But whatever we do from now on, we have to coincide, because there are existential risks in the process of digitalization linked to AI, linked to many other things that we have to tackle. And those risks go from privacy issues to discrimination or bias, to cyber attacks, and to just this thing becoming independent, if you want. So there are many risks. Actually, the Bletchley Park initiative has identified all these different risks and opportunities as well. So these three blocks of countries are doing different things and led by the same purpose, which is geopolitical supremacy, corporate preeminence, new markets, and the strength of their innovation ecosystems. And just like with a nuclear world, we need to come to some institutional and regulatory solutions, like the Institute for Energy, the agency, I cannot remember in English, the IEA, is it? Okay. Or CERN, for example. I mean, those are the kind of institutional solutions that we can follow in order to implement some digital global governance regulation. And we must do it very quickly, because
Chris, I come to you because you were a significant part of the UK infrastructure, at least in terms of digital governance. Do you really think there's a three empires or the two?
So I was going to take a slightly different approach, if that's okay. So I've described the superlatives, around GDS, but what we also have to remember is we got a lot of things wrong. We went down a lot of blind alleys. We wasted public money on things that didn't work out, unfortunately. So I'm going to try and knit a couple of things quickly together. So I think that if I step back, we used to have about 2 governments a week come and visit us in GDS, national and subnational governments. So hundreds of countries and large regions came through the doors, like trying to understand why we were ranked number 1, why we were ranked so high. We led the way in the world on design in particular and on putting user first and user needs first. So I would say there were 3 main approaches I saw and still see. One is a very technology-led approach. One is a very money-led approach. And one is trying to very much take a end-user-led approach. And I think of the 3, the most successful one I've seen, they've definitely done it in Singapore, they've definitely done it in Korea, they've definitely done it in Estonia and Denmark, is the user-led approach to say, first question is, what are we trying to do for the consumers of public services, right, in aggregate? What are their needs? What are the different groups? How do we test for that? How do we understand that? And that works well, because it means you're asking the technology question much further on, when you actually understand what technology needs you have, rather than leading with technology. I've got blockchain, I've got AI, what can I do with that? What's the application? And then money, I've seen some countries throwing, I saved one country, I'll remain nameless, $100 million in a single meeting by saying, don't do that, we did that, it was a terrible mistake. And I'm not even going to mention what the mistake is, but I said, and this is why, and I said it all out for them. They said, okay, we're not going to do that. So there was a large company out there that was probably very annoyed, put a hit out on me if they knew it was a result of that. But when you're coming at this money-led, you're saying, we're going to throw money at this. There are people out there who know what they're doing. This has been around for a decade. We're just going to hire them, and they're going to come in. Doesn't work unless they're also coming in with that user-centric mindset. So tech-led, money-led, user-led, and user-led wins every time for me.
Okay, you see these things are sort of globally relevant across cultures.
And what would be amazing is some kind of global brokerage of successes and failures. Like, talk about trust. What people would really trust is, and I didn't do enough of it when I was in GDS, is like, crikey, that really didn't work. We shared a lot of things about research that showed, okay, this is the wrong pattern, this is a better pattern. We were iterative in our design and in our approach to service provision, but if we'd been bolder about saying, actually, we really went down the wrong road here, we went down the wrong road there, other countries can learn from that, don't waste the same money, waste different money, but don't waste the money we did on figuring this out. Because in the end, when you're a government, you're the monopoly provider of public services in your country, I would almost always, there would be laughter. I'd meet civil servants from China, Korea, Malaysia, Australia, and we'd end up laughing at how similar the problems we had were in terms of meeting user needs and their expectations, but also what was stopping us doing that in terms of our own bureaucracy, our own politics. And that's vastly different types of politics around the world.
Muchka, I have to come to you. You represent and you work in a large global organization. How do you see this global collaboration that was mentioned in the question?
I was going to say, from our perspective, we are a global company and we are customer obsessed. Mm-hmm. So when Chris mentions, thinking about the end user, I mean, that's all we do, right? We think about who needs us, who wants us, where is the customer demand, how can we meet it, right? And what I see in terms of global collaboration, I think it does not always happen in the way that people might always expect. It's not always in terms of two countries that are equally wealthy or that the same types of populations. I think that it ends up being a lot about, in my mind, about economic development perspective and about how each country thinks around attracting business and helping people do business, which I think digital technology has become a cornerstone of. And so generally, regardless of what regulation or what beliefs guide the tactics of how that's done, generally when there is a mission around that and there's a mission around generating economic growth through digital transformation, then I think it facilitates the collaboration, kind of like Chris was mentioning, with very different countries from a cultural, geographic size, etc. perspective, aligning around similar values or a similar end goal, I think brings countries together, just like for us, being customer obsessed is what brings all of our parts together.
Now, I have one question that I would love to get your perspectives on is how does the digital infrastructure now change with AI? Now, we all know that AI, today at least, current technology requires tremendous amounts of power. We hear of companies, including AWS and others investing in their own power sources to a huge degree. How do you see these digital PPPs evolving now for the future when AI or access to AI is going to probably create huge differences in quality of life and economic success and many other factors? So how does this whole discussion of digital PPPs now evolve in the next phase? And AI is causing some huge challenges. Yeah, maybe Chris, do you want to begin?
I'll go quickly first. I think that the first question you've got to ask yourself as a state, as an entity like that is, in a service-oriented architecture where you've got your fundamental databases, you've got your platform layer and your service layer, application layer sitting on top of that, you've got to ask yourself, how deep do you want to push the AI? Because it can be in the data level, right in there. You can have it operating at platform level to help make that a smoother user journey and make it smarter, more sophisticated, more joined up. Or you can keep it up there. There are risks associated with pushing it deeper and deeper into the business, and a lot of regulatory concern, rightly, and all that kind of thing, and unexpected consequences and algorithmic kind of magic. So I think if that would be my starting point. Is there a way to stratify this according to the architecture, according to the infrastructure layers, to say, okay, what risks exist at what level, how hard, how are we going to press, where are we going to go for our machine learning, unsupervised learning, and all that kind of thing. I think that, for me, would be a starting point.
So do you see digital sort of PPPs being different at different levels?
Again, whatever your current tech stack is will help determine that. If you've got a partner like AWS, and they can reassure you, and they can do, maybe you're starting there. If you have a different partner or you have a different tech stack, that's organized fundamentally differently, maybe it's more distributed, that kind of thing, then you have to ask yourself different questions. But I think even though I don't like to start with tech, you start with needs, I think it's still true that you say that yourself about AI. What is the user need we're trying to meet with artificial intelligence, right? Okay. And then you say, okay, cool, if this is our tech stack, what are we doing with that? What are the risks of going this deep, this quickly, etc.? And you have to sequence it accordingly.
Muchka, I come to you. I saw this nice little sticker somewhere saying, no cloud, no AI. What's your view about how will this whole partnerships mode, mechanism change in the world of AI?
I get very inspired by upskilling initiatives and workforce development initiatives in particular. I have a friend whose mother lives in Brittany, and he was just telling me last week that she got tendinitis because she works in a meat factory, and she just does like this all day long. And I was telling him, it's crazy to think that in 2024, this is what your poor mommy's doing all day long. And so I think that this touches to the human aspect of AI and of public-private partnerships, which kind of like brings us back nicely full circle. In that there is a fear around AI taking away jobs. There is a fear around what this AI technology might do and how it might break some of the human aspect of our society. But then on the other hand, there's also tremendous opportunity. And that opportunity can break generational curses. That opportunity can really transform people's lives. I was in Montana with my team in the United States in September, and we met somebody who he is, I don't even remember what generation of like farmers, right? They have had a farm for what, like 10 generations or something. And this kid is in college, his grandfather is getting older, having more difficulty working the land. And this kid, who was, I think, maybe 20, maybe 21, used an AI-based application to completely redefine, reshape the prioritization of like what land to tend to when, and optimize the efficiency of the work, and spare his grandfather, a lot of personal and physical hardship. But then I started thinking about this and started thinking about, as these kind of apps will evolve, then those grandkids, this Generation Alpha, this Gen Z, what are they going to make with this? And how are they going to use it? And this kid, had really already thought about things that I had never thought about and that I found tremendously exciting. So to me, we need to all be in a position of listening, and we need to listen not just to each other, but to the people who are the end users and who are the customers, to see how they are using things. And then to me, that also relates back to workforce development and to upskilling, because I think we have a common responsibility, a global responsibility, to help lift people so that they can meet the challenges of this revolution.
Okay. Jose Ramon, you were in the Bletchley Summit. Did you all talk a little bit about what partnerships might be required in the future?
Yes, certainly. One of the things we have done is describe the risks and opportunities of these technologies. The first thing we see is, I cannot say, and no one uses this term, exponential increase in the power and application and escalation, etc., of AI. But the fact is that it is transforming, disrupting, let's say, almost every aspect of our lives. And it is expected to continue because we are just at the beginning. Some say, yes, it's slowing down, it doesn't matter. It's going to continue transforming everything. The point is that this marks a divide for all of society and economies, etc. And what I see when I read the NRI is a fractal structure where the same thing that we see globally, you can see within each country. And another thing is critical mass. There are some countries which already have critical mass, and you can see it in their investments in AI and digital, etc. They can continue the reaction. They can boost the reaction. For other countries, it's really a net expense, to keep up. But the fact is that we are dividing the world very, very quickly. Those who manage AI will prevail over those who don't. And all the forecast by many organizations from private heads about the unemployment or reaccommodation of employment is going to happen in such a way that the divide will continue. And what I see is that the whole community, the global community, has to come up with supportive solutions. PPP or PPA can be crucial, to help the rest of humanity not to lag behind and become absolutely, I use the term, irrelevant for the future economic and political, cultural growth. I mean, we're just leaving them behind at an exponential rate. And that is my main worry. The chapter on AI divide or societal divide, that is, and it has been my worry, and that is what I've been insisting most. No? It is an existential risk.
Kat, from a cyber resilience point of view?
Where to start?
Well.
I think on the future cyber resilience of AI models and what have you, we're looking obviously as part of the AI safety side of things at AI security and building security and from the outset by design, ensuring that the AI that will dominate all of our lives in the future is as secure and as resilient as it can be. I think the general arms race between the good guys and the bad guys will just continue. I think AI is just another playing field where we'll see that taking place. You start seeing cyber defenders using AI for cyber defense. You start seeing cyber attackers using AI for cyber attacks. I think that will just be the usual cat and mouse game and kind of escalation that we're already used to in cyberspace. I think the broader point around AI, at least in the Western world, is that I think, or I would argue, that the power dynamic between the public and the private sector is fundamentally shifting as a result of AI and where AI models are being developed and produced and made available. Because I think the ownership of the underlying data infrastructure and the AI development sits firmly within the private sector and firmly dominated within a few big tech players in the private sector, at least in the Western world. And I think that moves the role of government to either one of setting the guardrails and regulating and governing, and one of being a user as any other citizen or any other business. And what that means or implies for the future of digital public-private partnerships is probably worth a whole other discussion or a dissertation or what have you. But I think that changing dynamic is really worth exploring and keeping an eye on.
Okay, we're coming towards the end of the panel, and being in a business school, I have to ask you one question, which is, where's the money going to come from? Because the financing becomes a very important topic in actually laying out the infrastructure, whether it's AI, whether it's whatever you call broadband and everything. And when I listen to discussions, often who's going to pay for it becomes fundamentally critical. So what are your views and thoughts on that? I know this can be a long discussion, but let's condense it to a short one.
I'll be as quick as I can to build on your last point. So for anyone in the room, how many civil servants are there on the planet? About 200 million. How many public sector workers? About 600 million. It's the world's largest workforce. What's the sum total spend per year of the governments of the world? Does anyone know, roughly? It's about $30 trillion US in total. There's plenty of money. There's plenty of money, right? But to your point earlier about divergence, right? There's got to be a convergent dialogue. You know, I don't know how you divvy the world up, how we want to do it as governments, but as, again, the monopoly providers of public sector, public services, there is a shared interest. There's far more in common. If digital transformation is anything to go by, the challenges are about 90% common. So there's a huge opportunity there for the governments of the world to get themselves together and say, or in regions at least, to say, okay, our users, what are their needs? How are we going to prioritize? How are we going to sequence? How are we going to fund this? I think there's money there. There's enormous cost to be taken out of government. And I'm not just talking about massive job losses and things like that. I think, you know, there's whole new industries that are going to spin up. So I think that's, if you zoom right out, that's the picture. And I think how you zoom back in is what really matters, and who's got the vision. And there's been some things, Bletchley Park and things like that. There's been some things. So I'm really hoping to see, in particular, the UK and institutions that still carry trust in the UK, like our great universities, you know, show leadership, and people in this room and things like Network Readiness Index, I hope, contribute towards that.
Well, thank you for the plug. But you know, we'll see also, you know, this issue of government efficiency is important, and we'll see how the US experiment works out now. So we'll keep an eye on that. Other views on financing? Who should pay? How should we
I mean, I started by saying that I see public-private partnership as a financing model. I think that something as large as the world transformation that we are considering is not something that's going to come out of any one wallet. And we've talked about risk as well. We've talked about many other things that are of economic value. When big companies like AWS come in, build data centers, that does create economic value for the country. That does add value to the GDP of that country quite a bit, actually. There is also fiscal revenue that get created from those projects that go back to the country. But still, going back to what we talked about trust, there can be sometimes a perception of who is paying their fair share. And to me, it's a little bit, to give a very womanly example, when you have a newborn and you need mom to do 110% and dad to do 110%. And both mom and dad will feel like the other one is doing 0%. And so to me, there needs to be kind of a collective investment that goes in. And it's less about thinking constantly about like who is sharing what slice of the pie, but about kind of holding hands on.
Okay, that's a nice example. Jose Ramon, you gave an example already of what you're trying to do. Any further thoughts?
Well, yes. First of all, investment in AI systems and digital systems is the largest single investment in the world, in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Some estimates it will generate LLMs, for example, maybe $7 trillion towards the end of this decade, and maybe 14 trillion later. There is a thing that Professor Stuart Russell made. He said, well, just look at the potential. Just imagine that with digitalization and AI, we can lift the living standards of all of the world, from the poverty, etc., extreme poverty, etc., where they are, to a kind of middle-class rank in fairly near. Okay, that would mean, according to him, 14 times the present GDP of the world. So if that is what we can aspire, the money could come from elevating productivity, elevating goods and services, reducing costs, and making the whole world more efficient. I mean, I'm just putting it in a very silly way, but we should consider this as a possibility. Maybe all of humanity can be brought together in a kind of PPP, digital PPP, and use these technologies for the better good, where everybody contributes, everybody participates, and everybody benefits, and not just the big few.
Okay. Any thoughts from you?
I really like that, and I don't have much to add other than some of that goes back to, I think, the storytelling element, because I think we all agree that ultimately investment in digital transformation is a public good and therefore should be partially publicly funded. And I think things like the NRI and having the evidence of the impact that investment delivers will help with the storytelling, and it will help with the government, the private sector, the public preparedness to pay for that public good. So just keep doing what you're doing with the NRI.
Well, thank you so much, and that's a very nice note on which to call the panel to a close. So please join me in thanking our panel members. I think they were excellent in terms of sharing the ideas, and amongst them they have a great wealth of ideas. And I'm sure you will take the opportunity, as Mariam will say later, we'll have drinks and you can take the opportunity to share and learn from them a little bit more. Just a few words of closing from me. I think I'm very delighted that we had the session today. Thank you for making the time. I'd like to thank my colleagues at Portulans for organizing this. In particular, I think Salja, Sylvie, and Mariam played a wonderful role in the leadership of Rafael. and also our colleagues from the Saïd School for running and organizing this logistics of the event quite nicely. So thank you so much, and I hand over to Mariam. Yeah.
So thank you, Soumitra, and to our fantastic panelists, Chris, Kat, Jose Ramon, and Mushka, for a very open, interesting, honest conversation. I think we all learned a thing or two, and we will go away with some food for thought after today's event. I also like to thank all of you for coming, for your questions, for your engagement. I hope you found it interesting. I would also like to thank my colleagues who do a lot of hard work behind the scenes at Saïd Business School, as well as Portulans. You're the reason why this report keeps happening year after year, so thank you for your hard work. And yeah, with that, we've come to an end of today's event. We encourage all of you to visit the website, download the report, and learn more about the NRI, and also give us your honest comments and feedback for us to keep improving the NRI and the model for future editions, and for it to continue to remain the widely adopted and trusted source for metrics-based decision-making on technology and ICTs. And now I would like to invite all of you to come to the drinks and networking reception with us. And yeah, see you next year. Thank you very much.